You didn't see this one coming. CNN seems to have shifted gears for once because it is exposed the Kamala Harris campaign blatantly lifting policy positions from Donald Trump, but that's just the start of it because it concerns one of the most contentious subjects around the Trump presidency, which is the idea of a border wall. So subscribe to the channel and take a look at this before we dive in.
Tonight, K-File investigates. In a new report, you'll see first out front. The K-File team scoured Kamala Harris's tweets and statements going all the way back to 2017. And what they found was more than 50 instances of Harris slamming Trump's border wall. But now, new Harris campaign ads actually showcase that very wall.
As a border state prosecutor, she took on drug cartels and jailed gang members for smuggling weapons and drugs across the border.
And on top of critical tweets, Harris also wrote in her 2019 book, quote, "There was a bigger reason to oppose the border wall. A useless wall on the southern border would be nothing more than a symbol, a monument standing in opposition to not just everything I value, but to the fundamental values upon which this country was built. How could I vote to build what would be little more than a monument designed to send the cold, hard message, keep out?"
And guess what? Kamala Harris may have just done exactly that because it seems like finally after nearly 4 years in office and failing to live up to expectations on the border crisis, she's finally signaling a backing for the largest bipartisan border security bill introduced in 2024, but it is yet to pass and that leaves Kamala and her campaign in a bind. Why? Well, the bipartisan border security agreement is as good as it gets when it comes to the parties meeting in the middle on such a contentious issue, which means she's forced to back the compromises made by the Democratic Party to come to it. One of those compromises was to use the unspent funds from the Trump era meant for the border wall specifically for that purpose. The exact text of the bill outlines in part, and I quote, "None of the funds allocated for pedestrian physical barriers pursuant to this section may be made available for any purpose other than the construction of steel bollard pedestrian barrier built at least 18 to 30 feet in effective height and augmented with anti-climb and anti-dig features." It was always going to be hard for Kamala Harris to say it out loud, so could it be that she's embracing the tough on immigration approach as a whole? In light of her past statements, it's certainly hard to imagine, but I think what Andrew Kaczynski reveals here lends some weight to that theory.
Andrew, I mean, you all have gone through, scoured an incredible amount of material. Tell me more about what you found.
Yeah, that's right. We found more than 50 of those tweets criticizing the border wall before she used that in her ad. And I want people to take a look at just a few of what she said here. She called it wasteful, useless, a waste of taxpayer money, a vanity wall project, a wasteful border wall, a stupid wall, a medieval vanity project, and an unnecessary wall. And those are really just, there were more of this, just like 10 or like 50. But there was really a lot of this was the common refrain during the campaign. You read that quote where she said it was against everything that not only she stood for, everything America.
Interestingly enough, back when Donald Trump first floated the idea of a border wall back in 2015, we saw many in the Democratic quarters parrot a curious line, "Build bridges, not walls." It was borrowed from Pope Francis's retort to Trump and in a characteristic fashion, didn't really mean anything beneath the surface. It was an empty platitude and a word salad like the one we've come to expect from the Kamala campaign, and it's actually pretty effective. You can't argue against someone that says the simplest of righteous statements until they just end up sounding like a typical politician that you just can't get a straight answer out of. But it doesn't have to be that way because polls have repeatedly shown that the border wall debate is solidly divided along party lines, more than 86% of Republicans and just 13% of Democrats in favor of it. Why not just put your foot down and do something about it when you're in office, especially since that's clearly what your own base wants? What did the Democratic voters get instead? 4 years of empty statements just like the ones made in promises before the elections. Here's a few examples to remind you of that.
It's the president's vanity project.
His multi-billion-dollar vanity project called a wall is nothing more than a distraction from the fact that he actually hasn't focused on working people in America. He contrived a national crisis around his big distraction.
All right, so you go through all of that, you've got all the tweets, and yet all of a sudden in the ads, there's pictures of the wall, and then you went through to look at that wall. Yeah. Like, what is that specific wall that's in her campaign ads now? And you found something very interesting about this specific portion of the wall.
And I think what's also really remarkable about this is, like, I mean, you heard her talking about it there, Trump's wall in his campaign, during his presidency. There was really no greater symbol of Trump's presidency than the wall, in the way that Democrats were attacking him over the wall and his restrictive immigration policies. So we looked in that ad, and if you look at it, that exact area of wall is in Sasabe, Arizona, and that is a portion of wall that was actually built by Donald Trump. It was built in an area where there was not previous wall. It was actually pretty controversial when they were building it at the time. So just to see that, and then there are other.
She's using his wall that he built to say, "Look at what I did." Basically,
and the other images of the wall, we weren't able to pinpoint, but there's telltale signs that was a Trump wall, because there's an anti-climbing plate on top that became popularized during the Trump years.
The most you can do here is give Kamala Harris the benefit of the doubt for not micromanaging the ads to the extent that she knew what part of the border they were showing. But the larger trend is impossible to miss. The Kamala Harris campaign had only a few months before the election to fill the shoes of Joe Biden and catch up on all the lost time of a proper campaign. But that meant she had to be even more clear and concise about the policy position she laid out, especially at a volatile time when Americans are yearning for some clarity and strength from their leadership. What did they get instead? It was a campaign that is painfully out of touch with its messaging, combined with a failure to recognize that nice-sounding sentences can only get you so far. None of that is helped by Kamala Harris's general absence from the media and long-form conversations, and neither by her need to apparently pick popular policy positions from other places and rehashing them as her own. Something similar happened a few weeks ago when Kamala Harris came out with a supposedly revolutionary new idea, which is to abolish taxes on tips for service workers. But people quickly noticed how this idea had first floated by Donald Trump at the Republican National Convention as a part of a plan to jog and support the middle class of the country. Watch what she said right here.
When I was a United States Senator, we fought together for paid family leave and medical leave. And earlier this year, right here in Vegas, we celebrated your historic contract win. And it is my promise to everyone here, when I am president, we will continue our fight for working families of America. Including to raise the minimum wage and eliminate taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers.
That's a whole other debate from a policy perspective, despite the fact that it perhaps falls more on the economic libertarian camp, more like I am. From the view of political philosophy, eliminating taxes on tips could possibly lead to companies increasingly trying to get away with paying workers less upfront, probably requiring more regulation to rein it in. However, they don't pay servers that much anyway, and honestly, I would have loved to not get taxed on my tips when I was a server. But even when there's a separate debate, it does reveal a lack of original thought from the Kamala campaign at simply lifting and repeating a policy position, which could be what we're seeing with the border. Let me know in the comments how you view this, because it's not always that you get to see a CNN segment that's taking apart Democratic politicians just like this live on the air.